They called me names at family gatherings. His mother accidentally spilled wine on my dress. His father wouldn't shake my hand. But when James collapsed at dinner and stopped breathing, I was the only one who knew what to do. Everything changed that night. This is a story about love, prejudice, and a night that changed everything. If you've ever felt judged for who you are rather than what you do, hit that subscribe button and join me for this very personal journey. I never believed in love at first sight until that rainy Tuesday at Riverside Cafe. I was rushing in, shaking raindrops from my umbrella when I bumped into him. Literally. My coffee splashed across his white shirt, and instead of being upset, James laughed. That laugh, warm and genuine, like he'd been waiting his whole life to have a stranger ruin his favorite shirt. Growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood in Detroit, I'd built walls around myself after moving to this mostly white suburb for my nursing job. 2 years of polite smiles and surface-level friendships had left me guarded. I wasn't looking for love, especially not with someone whose world seemed so different from mine. But James was persistent. He came back to that cafe every Tuesday for a month, claiming they had the best scones in town, though I noticed he always looked disappointed on the days I wasn't working my side job there. When he finally asked me out, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our first date lasted 6 hours. Dinner turned into a walk by the river, which turned into sharing life stories on a park bench until 2 a.m. James was an architectural engineer with dreams of designing sustainable housing. He listened, really listened, when I talked about my nursing career and my passion for community health education. We fell into an easy rhythm, like we'd known each other in some previous life. Within 3 months, I was staying at his place more than mine. By 6 months, we were talking about moving in together. It was around then that James started mentioning his family. He came from old money, with a father who ran a law firm and a mother who chaired half the charity boards in town. The way his voice tightened when he talked about introducing me made my stomach knot. There was something unsaid in his hesitation, something in the way he'd changed the subject when I asked about his family's reaction to him dating a black woman. "They're just traditional," he'd say, rubbing the back of his neck. "They'll love you once they know you." But the night before our first dinner with them, I found him staring at his phone, reading old text messages from his mother. The worry in his eyes told me everything his words didn't. I should have recognized it as a warning, but I was too in love to believe anything could stand in our way. How naive I was back then. The Whitmore's house wasn't just a home, it was a statement. 3 stories of colonial architecture, sitting on 2 acres of manicured lawn, with a circular driveway where James parked his modest car between a Mercedes and a BMW. My palms were sweating as we walked to the door, and the diamond earrings I'd borrowed from my roommate suddenly felt like costume jewelry. "You look beautiful," James whispered, squeezing my hand before ringing the doorbell. The woman who answered, James's mother Eleanor, had his same green eyes, but none of their warmth. Her smile froze when she saw me, a split-second reaction that she quickly masked with practiced politeness. "So lovely to finally meet you," she said, air kissing near my cheek, the scent of expensive perfume lingering between us. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my natural hair that I'd spent an hour styling that morning. Dinner was a masterclass in subtle exclusion. Richard, James's father, asked about my background 3 different ways, each question digging for something I couldn't quite identify. When I mentioned my father was a high school principal, the conversation quickly shifted to James's cousin, who'd just made partner at a law firm. They spoke about people I didn't know, referenced inside jokes I couldn't share, and occasionally they'd slip into stories that would abruptly end when they remembered I was there. "Megan, would you mind passing the salt?" his sister Caroline asked, though it was clearly closer to her than to me. When our fingers brushed during the handoff, she subtly wiped her hand on her napkin. James saw it. I saw him see it, but he said nothing. That first dinner set the pattern. At the family Labor Day barbecue, Eleanor accidentally spilled red wine on my white dress. At Thanksgiving, I overheard Richard asking James if he was still going through that phase. Christmas was worse. James's grandmother refused to be in the family photo with me, claiming she was feeling unwell, only to miraculously recover for dessert. Each time, James would apologize in private. "They just need time," he'd say, his voice a mixture of embarrassment and hope. We'd fight about his silence, his unwillingness to confront them. "If I push too hard, they'll just dig in deeper," he reasoned. "Trust me, I know them." Despite everything, there were moments of connection. James's younger brother, Mike, defended me when an uncle made a comment about urban culture. Eleanor once complimented my carrot cake, asking for the recipe. Small victories that James celebrated as signs of progress. I wasn't so sure. The night before the family's Easter gathering, I sat James down. "I love you," I told him, "but I can't keep pretending this isn't hurting me." His eyes filled with tears as he promised to do better, to say something if anyone disrespected me again. I believed him, because I needed to, because walking away from him felt impossible. So I agreed to one more family dinner, not knowing it would be the one that changed everything. Easter Sunday, at the Whitmores, wasn't just a holiday, it was an event. Eleanor had decorated every inch of their sprawling home with pastel colors and fresh flowers. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly when I spotted place cards at the dining table. At least I wouldn't have to wonder where I belonged this time. James squeezed my hand when he noticed his mother had seated us together, a small kindness that shouldn't have felt so significant. The first hour passed in a blur of forced pleasantries. I'd become skilled at the dance of these gatherings, smile at the backhanded compliments, pretend not to notice the whispers, focus on James and the few family members who made genuine effort. That day, it was his Aunt Patricia who engaged me in conversation about my nursing career, while others mingled around platters of deviled eggs and smoked salmon. "Must be difficult," Richard commented, as I mentioned a challenging shift in the ER, dealing with all those people. The emphasis he placed on that last word hung in the air. I saw James's jaw tighten, saw him finally preparing to say something, but before he could, Eleanor announced dinner was served, and the moment passed. The meal itself was tense but manageable. I was picking at my glazed ham when James reached for the basket of rolls. His fingers fumbled, and the basket tipped over. A small thing, nothing worth noting, except his hand was trembling. When I looked at his face, alarm shot through me. His skin had taken on a greyish tinge, and a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. "James," I touched his arm, "are you okay?" He tried to respond, but his words slurred together. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward into his plate. Everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. Eleanor screamed. Richard jumped up, knocking over his chair. Caroline froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. But I was already moving, already shifting into the nurse I'd been trained to be. "Help me get him on the floor," I ordered, my voice cutting through the chaos. Mike responded instantly, helping me lower James to the hardwood. I loosened his collar, checked his breathing. It was shallow, irregular. His lips were turning blue. "Does James have any allergies?" I demanded, looking up at his family, who stood in a horrified circle around us. No," Eleanor stammered. "None that we know of." But something was very wrong. His face was swelling, and hives were appearing on his neck. Classic anaphylaxis. I dug through my purse, thanking every star in the sky that I carried an EpiPen for my own shellfish allergy. "What are you doing?" Richard barked as I prepared the injection. "Saving his life," I shot back, driving the needle into James's thigh through his pants. "Someone call 911. Now." The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. I monitored his pulse, started CPR when his breathing stopped completely, talked to him the entire time, though I had no idea if he could hear me. "Stay with me, James." "Don't you dare leave me here with your family," I whispered, trying to smile through tears that wouldn't stop falling. His family watched in stunned silence as I fought for each heartbeat, each breath, until finally the paramedics burst through the door. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Eleanor grabbed my wrist. For a moment, I thought she might blame me somehow. Instead, her eyes, so like her son's, were wide with something new, something that looked remarkably like respect. "Go with him," she said, her voice breaking. "He needs you." I climbed into the ambulance, holding James's cold hand as the sirens wailed. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the years of subtle jabs, not the cold shoulders or whispers. Just James, and the terrifying possibility of a world without him in it. Hospital waiting rooms have a way of stripping people down to their essence. In those harsh fluorescent lights, with the antiseptic smell burning your nostrils, pretenses fall away. I sat alone at first, my Easter dress stained with James's sweat and my makeup long cried off. When the Whitmores arrived 20 minutes later, they looked just as undone, Eleanor's perfect hair disheveled, Richard's tie loosened and crooked. They hesitated at the entrance to the waiting area, as if invisible lines still divided us. Then Mike broke away, sitting directly beside me. "You were amazing back there," he said quietly. One by one, the others joined us, forming a circle of shared fear and hope. 3 hours passed before the doctor appeared. "Mr. Whitmore experienced a severe allergic reaction," she explained. "We believe it was triggered by a new ingredient in the glaze on the ham, pine nuts." She looked directly at me then. "If you hadn't administered epinephrine when you did, we would be having a very different conversation. You saved his life." The relief was physical. I felt my knees buckle, and surprisingly, it was Eleanor who steadied me, her hand gripping my elbow. "Can we see him?" Richard asked, his authoritative voice now small. "Family only for now," the doctor replied. "He's still stabilizing." I prepared to sit back down, but Eleanor's hand remained on my arm. "She is family," she said firmly. The doctor nodded and led us to James's room. Seeing him there, pale against the white sheets, tubes and monitors everywhere, broke something open inside me. I rushed to his side, carefully taking his hand between mine. His eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on my face. "Hey, beautiful," he whispered hoarsely. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, doctor consultations, and a strange new reality. Richard brought me coffee one morning, just how I liked it, though I couldn't remember ever telling him. Eleanor asked about my shifts at the hospital, listening intently to my answers. It was as if the ice had begun to thaw, but slowly, cautiously, on both sides. A week after James came home, Eleanor invited me to lunch, just the two of us. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, awkwardness hovering between us until she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said, her eyes fixed on her untouched salad. "Several, actually." "Mrs. Whitmore, Eleanor, please." She looked up then. "I've spent a lifetime surrounding myself with people who look like me, think like me. I told myself it was about tradition, about comfort, but watching you fight for my son—" Her voice broke. I realized how small my world has been. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were still moments of tension, comments that made me wince. But now, when Richard made an insensitive remark about urban communities, Mike would call him out. When Caroline hesitated to hug me at family gatherings, Eleanor would give her a pointed look. The most profound change came from James himself. No longer was he the mediator, trying to keep everyone happy while addressing nothing. Now he spoke up immediately if someone crossed a line. "I almost died," he told his uncle who'd made a comment about my exotic appearance. "And the only reason I'm here is because of Megan. So you can either respect the woman I love, or you can leave our home." Our home. The words echoed in my heart, because that's what we were building together, not just a place to live, but a home where both of us could exist without compromise, without apology. A month after the hospital, James proposed on the same park bench where we'd talked until dawn on our first date. And when I called my mother with the news, it was Eleanor who asked to speak to her next, inviting her to help with the wedding plans. It wasn't perfect. Real change never is. But it was honest, and it was trying, and sometimes that's more powerful than perfection. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright, 9 months after that Easter Sunday that changed everything. I stood in a side room of the Whitmore's garden, my mother adjusting my veil, while Eleanor fastened my grandmother's pearl bracelet around my wrist, something borrowed that she insisted I keep afterward. "You've given me back my son," she said softly. "Not just his life, but who he really is." Her eyes met mine in the mirror, no longer assessing or judging, but seeing, truly seeing me. The ceremony itself was a blend of both our worlds. James's family's traditional Episcopal service merged with elements from my family's Baptist traditions. My father's church choir sang, while Richard, surprisingly, read a poem by Langston Hughes. As James and I exchanged vows, under an arch of white roses and blue hydrangeas, I could feel the weight of what we'd overcome and what we'd built, surrounding us like a tangible thing. The reception that followed wasn't without its awkward moments. My cousins from Detroit were initially standoffish with James's college friends. James's grandmother still struggled with some of her comments, catching herself midway through, asking my mother if she made authentic soul food, ishu. But there was effort on all sides, genuine effort that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Caroline, who once couldn't bear to touch my hand, drunkenly proclaimed me the sister I never had, while teaching my teenage nieces how to waltz. Mike and my brother exchanged phone numbers, making plans to watch the Lions game the following weekend. And Richard, stern, difficult Richard, pulled me aside as James and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "I was wrong about a lot of things." He pressed an envelope into my hand, a donation to the community health center where I volunteered, enough to fund the diabetes education program I'd been trying to establish for months. The journey didn't end with "I do." 3 years later, there are still moments that catch us off guard. James's second cousin who makes uncomfortable comments at family reunions. The store security guard who follows me but not Eleanor when we shop together. The neighbors who did a double take when we moved into our house in James's childhood neighborhood. But now, these moments become opportunities rather than obstacles. Eleanor has become an unexpected ally, calling out prejudice when she sees it with the conviction of someone who knows exactly how wrong she once was. Richard joined a diversity committee at his law firm, awkwardly but earnestly trying to address the lack of black partners. And James, my James, no longer waits for a crisis to stand up for what matters. Last month, we welcomed our daughter into the world, Sophia Patricia Whitmore, named after both our grandmothers. Watching Eleanor and my mother fuss over her in the hospital room, arguing good-naturedly about whose eyes she had, I realized something profound. Love doesn't just cross boundaries. When it's real, it erases them entirely. I often think about that Easter Sunday, about how the worst day of our relationship became the catalyst for its deepest transformation. There's a scar on James's thigh from where I jabbed the EpiPen. Sometimes he catches me looking at it and smiles. "Best decision I ever made," he jokes, going into anaphylactic shock. We laugh about it now, but we never forget how close we came to losing everything. Not just James's life, but the chance to build this family that extends beyond blood and race and history. People sometimes ask me how I forgave the Whitmores for those early days, for the 1,000 little cuts they inflicted before they learned to see me. The truth is, forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a series of choices, by all of us, to see past our fears, to acknowledge our mistakes, to believe people can change because sometimes they do. I didn't just save James's life that day. In some ways, he and his family saved mine too, from the walls I'd built, from the bitterness I could have carried forever. We saved each other by refusing to give up, by believing that love could be bigger than prejudice. And it is. Every day in our imperfect, beautiful, trying its best family, love proves itself bigger. That's the story I'll tell Sophia someday. Not just how I saved her father's life, but how that moment saved all of us, in all the ways that truly matter. Our differences only define us if we let them. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own experiences, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your thoughts or your own story of overcoming prejudice. Remember, sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal our shared humanity.